Have you ever wondered why certain people trigger you so intensely that their mere presence can shift your entire emotional state? Why you find yourself consumed with anger towards strangers whose only crime was expressing an opinion that somehow felt like a personal attack? Carl Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychiatrist who dared to map the hidden territories of the human psyche, discovered something unsettling about these reactions. He found that the people we despise most, the traits we condemn with righteous fury, often mirror the very aspects of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection, and what he uncovered about those who deny their shadow will forever change how you see yourself and everyone around you. In the next 45 minutes, you'll discover the 5 devastating patterns that Jung identified in people who refuse to face their dark side. You'll learn why shadow denial doesn't just limit personal growth, but actually amplifies the very darkness we're trying to escape. We'll explore the psychological mechanisms that keep us trapped in cycles of judgment and projection. And most importantly, you'll understand how recognizing your own shadow can become the key to unprecedented freedom and authentic power. This isn't just theoretical psychology. This is the blueprint for breaking free from the invisible prison that most people never even realize they're living in. Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, and among all his discoveries, perhaps none was more profound than his understanding of the shadow. The shadow, in Jungian terms, isn't simply our negative traits. It's the repository of everything we've learned to reject about ourselves, everything we've been taught is unacceptable, inappropriate, or shameful. It contains not just our capacity for cruelty or selfishness, but also our untamed creativity, our raw sexuality, our fierce independence, our righteous anger. The shadow is everything we've disowned to maintain our carefully constructed persona, the mask we wear to navigate society's expectations. But here's what Jung discovered that shocked even him. The more vehemently someone denies their shadow, the more powerfully it operates in their life. It's as if the psyche has its own laws of physics, where every action creates an equal and opposite reaction. The energy we use to suppress our shadow doesn't disappear. It gets redirected, often in ways that are far more destructive than if we had simply acknowledged these aspects of ourselves from the beginning. The first pattern Jung identified in shadow deniers is what he called compulsive moral superiority. These individuals develop an almost addictive relationship with being right, being good, being pure. They become the self-appointed guardians of morality, quick to judge others, and even quicker to distance themselves from anyone who might threaten their carefully maintained self-image. Consider the person who prides themselves on never losing their temper, who speaks in measured tones about the importance of emotional regulation. Yet somehow, they find themselves surrounded by toxic people, constantly frustrated by others' inability to meet their standards. They don't see their own aggression because it's been sanitized, transformed into righteousness. Their anger doesn't explode, it seeps out as condescension, passive-aggressive comments, or cold withdrawal. They've convinced themselves they're peaceful, but everyone around them walks on eggshells. Jung understood that this moral superiority serves a crucial psychological function. It creates distance between the conscious ego and the threatening shadow material. By positioning themselves as inherently good, these individuals can maintain the illusion that they're fundamentally different from those they judge. But this distance comes at a tremendous cost. The energy required to maintain this position is exhausting, and the constant vigilance against their own darkness creates a rigid, joyless existence. The psychological consequence of this pattern is what Jung called a split in the personality. The persona becomes increasingly detached from the authentic self, creating an internal war that manifests as chronic dissatisfaction despite outward success. These individuals often report feeling empty, as if they're living someone else's life, because in many ways they are. The second pattern is perhaps even more insidious: unconscious projection of rejected qualities. When we refuse to acknowledge aspects of our shadow, the psyche has to do something with that energy. It doesn't simply disappear because we've decided it doesn't exist. Instead, it gets projected onto others, particularly those who dare to express the very qualities we've disowned. Jung observed that the intensity of our reaction to others is directly proportional to how much we're denying that same quality in ourselves. The person who reacts with disgust to others' attention-seeking behavior is often desperately hungry for attention themselves, but has learned to shame this natural human need. The individual who can't stand lazy people might be exhausted from years of compulsive productivity, secretly longing for rest, but unable to give themselves permission. This projection mechanism operates completely outside of conscious awareness. The person isn't deliberately trying to avoid seeing their own traits. They genuinely believe the problem lies entirely with others. This creates a peculiar kind of blindness, where they can analyze others' motivations with laser precision while remaining completely oblivious to their own patterns. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly revolutionary. These projections aren't random. The people who trigger us most intensely are often mirrors, reflecting back the disowned parts of our psyche with uncomfortable accuracy. The colleague whose confidence we label as arrogance might be showing us our own unexpressed power. The friend whose emotional expressions we dismiss as manipulation might be demonstrating the authentic feeling we've learned to suppress. The third pattern Jung identified is what he termed emotional numbing masquerading as strength. Many shadow deniers equate emotional suppression with emotional mastery. They've learned to pride themselves on their ability to remain calm under pressure, to think logically rather than feel deeply, to maintain composure when others fall apart. On the surface, this might seem admirable, even necessary for functioning in a complex world. But Jung discovered that what appears to be emotional regulation is often emotional amputation. These individuals haven't learned to manage their emotions. They've learned to disconnect from them entirely. The shadow, in this case, contains not just negative emotions, but the full spectrum of human feeling. The woman who never cries because she's strong carries within her shadow an ocean of unshed tears. The man who prides himself on his rationality bears in his shadow the passionate, intuitive aspects of his nature. They've achieved a kind of equilibrium, but it's the equilibrium of the living dead, a flatlined existence where nothing can hurt them because nothing can truly touch them. Jung understood that emotions aren't obstacles to overcome, but information to integrate. They're the language through which our deeper wisdom communicates. When we consistently override our emotional responses in favor of what we think we should feel, we gradually lose touch with our authentic desires, values, and needs. We become skilled at living according to external expectations, while our true self withers in the darkness. The consequence of emotional numbing extends far beyond the individual. These people often become emotional vacuums in their relationships, drawing energy from others without reciprocating. They're attracted to highly emotional partners, not out of complementarity, but out of unconscious envy. Through their partners, they can experience emotions vicariously while maintaining their identity as the stable one. The fourth pattern is particularly tragic: the compulsive need to save or fix others. Jung noticed that many shadow deniers develop an obsession with rescuing people, but not from genuine compassion. Instead, this behavior serves to reinforce their identity as the good, capable, together person, while keeping them safely removed from their own need for healing. These individuals are drawn to broken people like moths to flame. They surround themselves with addicts, emotional disasters, and perpetual victims. On the surface, this appears altruistic, even noble. They're the ones who always have time to listen, who offer practical solutions, who sacrifice their own needs for others' crises. But Jung saw through this apparent selflessness to the shadow beneath. The compulsive rescuer is unconsciously projecting their own wounded inner child onto others. By saving the broken person outside, they're attempting to heal the broken person within, but indirectly, through proxy. This keeps them from having to acknowledge their own wounds, their own neediness, their own areas of helplessness and confusion. The psychological mechanism is ingenious in its self-deception. By positioning themselves as the helper, they maintain superiority over those they're helping. They get to feel needed, valuable, and whole, while avoiding the vulnerability of admitting their own brokenness. But this dynamic inevitably creates resentment on both sides. The helper becomes frustrated when their efforts don't produce lasting change, and the helped often feels patronized and diminished. Jung understood that authentic helping requires what he called wounded healer consciousness, the recognition that we're all broken in some way, all struggling with aspects of the human condition. When we help from this place, there's no superiority, no hidden agenda, just genuine human connection and mutual recognition of our shared fragility and strength. The psychological consequence of compulsive rescuing is a life lived in reaction to others' problems, rather than in response to one's own calling. These individuals often reach midlife having devoted decades to others' growth, while remaining mysteriously stuck in their own development. They've become experts on everyone else's psychology while remaining strangers to themselves. But perhaps the most dangerous pattern Jung discovered is the one that underlies all the others, the belief that the shadow can be permanently eliminated. This is the fantasy that drives shadow denial. The idea that with enough willpower, therapy, spiritual practice, or moral effort, we can become purely good, purely light, purely evolved. Jung called this the inflation of the persona, and he considered it one of the most perilous psychological states. This pattern often emerges in highly spiritual or psychologically sophisticated individuals who've done enough inner work to believe they've transcended their darker impulses. They speak eloquently about love and light, about raising consciousness and spiritual evolution. They meditate daily, practice gratitude, and surround themselves with positive influences. Yet somehow their relationships are fraught with conflict. Their families walk on eggshells, and they leave a trail of wounded people who couldn't live up to their standards. The tragedy is that their spiritual pursuits, rather than integrating the shadow, have simply created a more sophisticated form of denial. They've learned to reframe their judgments as discernment, their anger as boundaries, their control as leadership. The shadow hasn't disappeared, it's gone underground, operating through spiritual bypass and enlightened superiority. Jung was particularly concerned about this pattern because it often affects influential people, teachers, healers, leaders, and guides. When someone in a position of authority denies their shadow, the consequences ripple outward, affecting everyone in their sphere of influence. The guru who preaches unconditional love while secretly harboring deep resentments. The therapist who helps others integrate their darkness while remaining blind to their own. The spiritual teacher who speaks of ego death while being driven by massive, unacknowledged ego needs. If you've stayed with me this far, you're probably recognizing some of these patterns in yourself or others. That recognition isn't comfortable, but it's the beginning of genuine psychological freedom. Because here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your exiled self waiting to be reclaimed. The shadow contains not just what we consider negative, but everything we've learned to reject about ourselves. For many people, this includes their power, their creativity, their sexuality, their anger, their joy, their ambition, their tenderness. We don't just suppress our capacity for cruelty, we suppress our capacity for authentic aliveness. The energy tied up in shadow denial is energy that could be flowing into creativity, relationship, and genuine contribution to the world. Jung's approach to shadow integration wasn't about acting out every impulse or embracing destructive behaviors. It was about developing what he called conscious relationship with all aspects of the psyche. This means acknowledging our capacity for both kindness and cruelty, both wisdom and foolishness, both strength and vulnerability. It means recognizing that we contain multitudes and that our humanity includes our darkness. The process begins with what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. Instead of immediately trying to fix, change, or transcend uncomfortable aspects of ourselves, we learn to sit with them, to study them, to understand what they're trying to tell us. The anger we've been suppressing might contain important information about violated boundaries. The selfishness we've been denying might be pointing toward neglected self-care. The jealousy we're ashamed of might be highlighting unlived aspects of our own potential. This doesn't mean acting on every shadow impulse, but it does mean acknowledging their existence and exploring their deeper meaning. Jung found that when people develop conscious relationship with their shadow, something remarkable happens. The compulsive quality of these traits begins to diminish. We're no longer driven by unconscious forces because we're in dialogue with them. The person who acknowledges their capacity for anger often finds they need to express it less frequently because it's no longer building up in their unconscious. The individual who owns their selfishness discovers they can make conscious choices about when to prioritize themselves and when to serve others. The recognition of our shadow doesn't make us worse people. It makes us more complete, more authentic, and paradoxically, more genuinely loving. Jung also discovered that shadow integration has profound effects on our relationships. When we stop projecting our disowned qualities onto others, we begin to see them more clearly, with greater compassion and less reactivity. The people who once triggered us intensely become ordinary humans with their own struggles and gifts. We develop what Jung called differentiated consciousness, the ability to distinguish between our internal experience and external reality. This shift in perception transforms every relationship. Partners stop trying to change each other because they're no longer trying to fix their projections. Parents become more accepting of their children's authentic nature rather than trying to mold them into an image of who they think they should be. Friends and colleagues notice that we've become less judgmental, more present, more genuinely interested in understanding rather than being right. But perhaps the most profound change is in our relationship with ourselves. Shadow integration leads to what Jung called self-compassion born of humility. When we acknowledge our full humanity, including our capacity for failure, selfishness, and harm, we develop genuine empathy for the human condition. We become gentler with ourselves and others because we understand how difficult it is to be human, how easy it is to make mistakes, how universal is the struggle to grow into our better selves. This doesn't lead to moral relativism or spiritual laziness. If anything, it creates more genuine motivation for growth because it's no longer driven by self-hatred or fear of our darkness. We want to become more loving, not because we're afraid of being bad, but because we've tasted the freedom that comes from being whole. Jung's research showed that individuals who successfully integrate their shadow often experience what he called the return of vitality. Energy that was previously locked in suppression becomes available for creative expression, authentic relationship, and meaningful contribution. They become more spontaneous, more passionate, more genuinely present. Their laughter is deeper, their tears more cleansing, their love more real because it includes acceptance of their own and others' full humanity. The final insight Jung offers about shadow denial is perhaps the most hope-giving. It's never too late to begin this integration. The psyche has an inherent drive toward wholeness that Jung called the transcendent function. This is the aspect of our consciousness that seeks to bridge the gap between conscious and unconscious, between persona and shadow, between who we think we are and who we really are. This transcendent function can be activated through many practices: depth therapy, dream work, creative expression, meditation, journaling, or simply the courageous commitment to notice when we're projecting onto others. The key is developing what Jung called active imagination, the ability to engage consciously with unconscious material rather than being unconsciously driven by it. Some people begin this work through crisis. A relationship fails, a career implodes, or a health challenge forces them to confront aspects of themselves they've been avoiding. Others begin through curiosity, a growing sense that there's more to life than their current experience, a feeling that they're living on the surface of their own existence. Still others are called to this work through what Jung termed the summons of the self, an inner knowing that it's time to become who they really are. The path of shadow integration isn't easy, but it's profoundly rewarding. It requires courage to look at ourselves honestly, humility to acknowledge our imperfections, and patience to develop new ways of being in the world. But the alternative, continuing to live in denial of our full humanity, is far more costly in the long run. As we conclude this exploration of Jung's discoveries about shadow denial, take a moment to reflect on your own relationship with your darkness. What qualities in others trigger your strongest reactions? What aspects of yourself do you work hardest to suppress or hide? What would it mean to develop a friendlier relationship with these disowned parts of your psyche? Remember, the goal isn't to become perfect or to eliminate your shadow. The goal is to become whole, to integrate all aspects of yourself into conscious awareness, to live with greater authenticity and less reactivity. Jung believed that this integration isn't just personal healing. It's essential for the healing of our relationships, our communities, and our world. When we stop projecting our shadows onto others, we stop contributing to the cycles of blame and scapegoating that create so much suffering in our world. When we own our capacity for both good and evil, we become less likely to demonize those who think differently than us. When we integrate our shadow, we become capable of genuine love, love that includes rather than excludes, love that sees clearly rather than through the fog of projection. The journey toward wholeness isn't a destination, but a way of traveling. It's a commitment to ongoing, honest self-reflection, to curiosity about our inner world, to compassion for our human struggles. It's the recognition that our imperfections aren't obstacles to overcome, but aspects of ourselves to understand and integrate. Jung's final message about the shadow might surprise you. It's not something to be feared or eliminated, but something to be grateful for. Our shadow contains not just our capacity for harm, but our capacity for authentic power, creative expression, and deep feeling. It holds the keys to our vitality, our passion, and our genuine contribution to the world. The people who most deeply touch our lives, who create lasting change and beauty in the world, are rarely those who've eliminated their darkness. They're those who've learned to dance with their full humanity, who've integrated their light and shadow into something richer and more real than either could be alone. As you leave this exploration and return to your daily life, carry with you Jung's revolutionary insight. You are not your persona, the carefully constructed image you present to the world. You are not your shadow, the rejected aspects you've learned to hide. You are the totality of your being, the whole of your experience, the full spectrum of your humanity. And in embracing this wholeness, you don't become a worse person. You become a more authentic one, capable of genuine love, real creativity, and meaningful contribution to the healing of our world. The shadow you've been running from isn't your enemy. It's your exiled self waiting to come home. And in welcoming it back, you don't become darker. You become more complete, more real, more genuinely alive. This is Jung's gift to us, the understanding that wholeness, not perfection, is the goal of human development, and that in embracing our full humanity, shadows and all, we finally become free to be who we really are.